Hello, everyone. Fixing the innovation engine is the core thesis we will dissect today. The US patent system, originally designed to be the ultimate catalyst for economic progress, has been inadvertently re engineered to stifle the very innovation it was meant to protect. We are looking at the anatomy of an economic engine, a construct that was historically intended to output protected innovation and reliable economic growth. Intellectual property rights were meant to serve as an incentive mechanism, creating a clear market commercialization pathway for pioneer inventions and breakthroughs. But consider the current output. Instead of a system for progress and reward, we have engineered an innovation tax and a state of permanent litigation gridlock. We are observing the cost of a broken mechanism. The machinery is choked by systemic bottlenecks, settlement costs, and the explosion of litigation driven by non-practicing entities, often referred to as patent trolls. Wasted resources bleed into administrative burdens, and junk patents act as literal blockages in the gears of market dynamics, creating profound market distortion. By mapping the legal, administrative, and the economic shifts of the past 3 decades, we can perform a visual autopsy of this broken mechanism. This is not merely about flawed paperwork. It is a structural collapse of a foundational social contract. When the legal protections intended to foster research and development, investment flows are weaponized to extract rents, the economic engine turns against itself. We must establish a rigorous blueprint for its repair, understanding that the system currently rewards the exploitation of legal ambiguity rather than the creation of tangible value. The intended pipeline where brilliant ideas receive temporary monopolies in exchange for public disclosure and societal advancement has been hijacked. The gears are grinding to a halt under the weight of frivolous claims. The intellectual property framework must be understood as a delicate equilibrium between private reward and public good. When that balance shatters, the resulting gridlock stifles human progress. When a system grants a federal monopoly for a sealed peanut butter and jelly sandwich, its fundamental mechanism of scrutiny has collapsed. The paradox of the PB&J is not an anomaly. It is the visible symptom of a systemic inability to filter the truly novel from the entirely obvious. Consider the profound implications of patent number 6,004,596 awarded to the J.M. Smucker Company for a sealed crustless sandwich. The input here is an ancient, widely known culinary practice. The method of crimping the edges of dough or bread is identical to the traditional Cornish pasty crimp method, a technique established centuries ago, yet the Patent and Trademark Office failed to identify this basic prior art. This represents a catastrophic system failure. The epistemological threshold for what constitutes an invention has been lowered to the point of absurdity. The outcome of this failure is not just a humorous anecdote, it has severe economic consequences. Smucker used the federal government's authority to issue cease and desist letters to Albies Foods, a small Michigan grocer. This sparked expensive federal litigation over a sandwich. What we see here is the weaponization of a legally granted monopoly against a small market participant, utilizing the brute force of federal authority to crush basic competition. If the foundational gatekeeping mechanism cannot distinguish between an ancient culinary trick and a genuine technological breakthrough, the entire premise of the intellectual property system is compromised. The core philosophical justification for granting a patent is to reward an inventor for adding something genuinely new to the collective human reservoir of knowledge. Granting a monopoly over a crustless peanut butter and jelly sandwich mocks this justification. It reveals an administrative apparatus that has lost its critical capacity to analyze prior art, essentially granting ownership over the mundane. This inability to discern the obvious from the novel fundamentally distorts the marketplace, allowing massive corporations to appropriate pre-existing practices and tax the public for their everyday use. This systemic failure transforms the patent office from a guardian of innovation into an enabler of corporate overreach. Patents function as conceptual fences, granting temporary monopolies to offset the massive inherent sunk costs of research and development. To grasp the economics of the mousetrap, we must confront the immense financial risks inherent in pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Without the legal fence of a patent, imitators can instantly replicate successful innovations without bearing any of the initial research and development costs. This creates a fatal freerider problem that would otherwise paralyze technological advancement. The system must guarantee high rewards for the 1 in 10,000 success to subsidize the 9,999 failures. Imagine the development of a groundbreaking pharmaceutical. The sunk costs are staggering. A company might test 5,000 to 10,000 chemical compounds just to find a handful of viable candidates. Perhaps 250 of those enter preclinical testing. Only 5 might make it to actual clinical trials. Out of that massive funnel of expenditure and effort, only one single compound receives FDA approval. The conceptual fence provided by a patent is the only economic justification for undertaking such a perilous financial journey. It serves as a temporary, legally enforced monopoly designed explicitly to balance risk and reward. If competitors could simply copy the chemical structure of that one successful drug the moment it hit the market, the original innovator would never recover the capital incinerated during the thousands of failed experiments. Therefore, the patent is not merely a reward, it is an economic necessity, a structural subsidy for failure. The temporary monopoly ensures that the innovator can extract a premium during the patent's lifespan, compensating for the massive asymmetry between the cost of creation and the cost of imitation. This delicate economic architecture relies completely on the temporary nature of the fence. It provides enough time to recoup the massive sunk costs and fund future exploration before the knowledge inevitably passes into the public domain to enrich society permanently. The entire engine of modern commercial innovation rests upon this precise, calculated imbalance. In complex, multi-component industries like biotechnology and semiconductors, innovation is inherently cumulative. Dense, overlapping patent claims can halt progress entirely. We transition from the necessity of a single conceptual fence to the paralyzing threat of cumulative thickets. In the first phase of technological evolution, we typically see a pioneer patent. This initial core invention has a clear, defined boundary, operating much like a solitary fence protecting a distinct plot of intellectual land. But phase 2 introduces the thicket. Subsequent patent claims create a gridlock of overlapping, conflicting rights. When hundreds of fences are erected over the same abstract territory, the transaction costs of navigating them become insurmountable. Take the semiconductor industry as a surgical thought experiment. A single modern microchip utilizes thousands of distinct patented processes. This density makes accidental infringement practically unavoidable. A manufacturer cannot possibly clear every overlapping abstract fence before bringing a product to market. This semiconductor gridlock fundamentally alters the nature of technological development, turning engineering into an exercise in legal risk management. Similarly, consider the biotechnology sector. The licensing of dozens of fragmented genetic research tools becomes financially non-viable. If every discrete sequence of DNA, every specialized protein, and every foundational research method is fenced off by a different entity, the aggregate cost of licensing, often referred to as royalty stacking, strangles the research pipeline before a viable therapy can even be conceptualized. This biotech gridlock represents a tragic market failure, where the sheer proliferation of property rights destroys the utility of the property itself. The abstract fence, originally designed to protect the pioneer, mutates into a labyrinth of barbed wire that traps subsequent innovators. Progress is halted not by a lack of scientific ingenuity, but by the suffocating density of legal claims. The cumulative nature of modern innovation requires a fluid exchange of foundational tools and ideas, but the proliferation of overlapping patents fragments the technological landscape creating a tragedy of the anti-commons where valuable resources are chronically underused due to excessive ownership. Centralizing patent appeals in a single court inadvertently weaponized patents, heavily favoring patent holders and lowering the standard for non-obviousness. To understand this structural sabotage, we must examine the profound judicial shift that occurred in 1982. Prior to this catalyst, regional courts interpreted patent validity. The system operated with a natural equilibrium. Win rates between patent holders and the challengers were essentially balanced. Regional judges maintained a rigorous skepticism toward monopolies, ensuring that only truly groundbreaking inventions survived legal scrutiny. Congress then intervened, creating the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, or CAFC, to centralize patent appeals. This centralization acted as a dramatic catalyst, altering the entire legal landscape. The data integration from this era tells a stark story. Pre-1982, patents were held valid on appeal roughly 30% of the time. Post-1982, that validity rate spiked to 55%, a massive 25% increase. Simultaneously, we observe a sharp upward trend in permanent injunctions shutting down competitors, exemplified by Polaroid forcing Kodak entirely out of the instant photography market. The scales of justice tilted heavily toward patent holders, creating an inescapable pro-plaintiff bias. The key concept here is that the presumption of validity became nearly absolute. Patents underwent a fundamental philosophical transformation. They morphed from defensive shields designed to protect fragile research and development into offensive weapons deployed to extract rents and suppress competition. Centralizing the appellate process isolated patent law from broader judicial currents, creating a specialized echo chamber that systematically lowered the bar for what constitutes a non-obvious invention. When the legal threshold for obviousness drops, the system begins to reward incremental, trivial changes with ironclad federal monopolies. This judicial recalibration effectively removed the friction required to invalidate junk patents, emboldening patent holders to wield their legal rights aggressively. The creation of the CAFC inadvertently dismantled the judicial skepticism that historically kept the patent system honest, replacing it with a structural presumption that overwhelmingly favors the monopolists. Shifting the patent and trademark office to a fee-based model in the 1990s aligned agency incentives with granting patents rather than rigorously scrutinizing them. This second sabotage variable represents a profound administrative perversion. A congressional mandate dictated that the PTO must fund itself entirely via applicant fees. This effectively transformed a crucial regulatory gatekeeper into a profit-driven enterprise. By treating the applicant as a paying client, the PTO adopted a customer service model. In this distorted paradigm, the primary administrative goal becomes client satisfaction, which, in this context, explicitly translates to patent approvals rather than the rigorous gatekeeping the public relies upon. The applicant is no longer a petitioner seeking a rare monopoly, but a customer purchasing a product. This dynamic is compounded by the phenomenon of revenue diversion. Because the PTO generates massive fee revenue by processing an ever-increasing volume of applications, Congress routinely siphons excess funds into the general federal budget. The tragic irony is that the PTO is left severely under-resourced despite generating record-high revenues. Let us look through a micro-portrait window at the daily reality of this broken system. An individual patent examiner tasked with reviewing highly complex financial software patents is often allotted under 12 hours total to conduct exhaustive research. Within this impossible time frame, they must definitively determine the novelty and non-obviousness of the code. This is an epistemological impossibility. The administrative architecture forces examiners to prioritize speed and volume over analytical rigor. The institutional incentive structure actively punishes meticulous scrutiny and rewards rapid approval. When the operational budget of the agency depends upon a constant influx of application fees, rejecting paying customers becomes an existential threat to the bureaucracy itself. Thus, The PTO's transformation into a profit center systematically dismantles the critical friction required to assess true innovation, replacing scholarly evaluation with a bureaucratic assembly line designed to rubber stamp monopolies for the sake of institutional revenue. Underfunded examiners facing a flood of applications default to approval, which in turn incentivizes an even greater flood of low-quality applications. We are examining a classic destructive feedback loop that paralyzes the mechanism of scrutiny. Node 1 begins with the courts, which make patents significantly easier to enforce and highly lucrative. This judicial leniency fuels Node 2. The incentive to file frivolous or marginal patents skyrockets. Consequently, at Node 3, the PTO is flooded with an unprecedented volume of submissions, experiencing jumps to over 350,000 applications per year. This massive influx crashes into Node 4. Overworked, under-resourced examiners fundamentally lack the time to find existing prior art. Trapped in this processing bottleneck, we reach Node 5. The default administrative action becomes approval, resulting in the mass issuance of junk patents. The return arrow completes the destructive cycle. These junk patents are then used by corporations and individuals to extract high settlements, heavily reinforcing the lucrative nature of patents back at Node 1. Consider Virgil Daugherty III's infinitely lived options patent. Here, a student literally patents a slight variation of the Nobel-winning Black-Scholes financial formula. He then leverages this absurd grant to demand royalties from Wall Street institutions, simply because the examiners lack the resources and time to uncover the deeply established academic prior art. This is not a glitch. It is the predictable outcome of the bottleneck. When the system's defensive filters fail, it becomes highly rational for opportunists to submit trivial claims. The bureaucratic exhaustion of the examiner translates directly into unearned wealth for the applicant. The feedback loop sustains itself by constantly lowering the qualitative threshold, encouraging a culture of speculative filings where applicants overwhelm the agency, knowing that the default path of least administrative resistance is to grant a monopoly. As patents became easier to get and harder to invalidate, litigation volume tripled, transforming the legal system into an expensive battlefield. The data starkly illustrates the weaponization of the patent. If we observe the trajectory of patent litigation cases from 1980 to the year 2000, the graph reveals a terrifying exponential curve. Cases languished at a relatively stable, low baseline for decades, but as the judicial and administrative guardrails were systematically dismantled, the number of thousands of cases skyrocketed. This explosion of litigation represents a devastating innovation tax on the productive economy. Defending a major patent infringement suit, where $25 million or more is at risk, now costs between $2 million and $4.5 million in legal fees alone. This massive capital drain does not produce a single new technology, a single cure, or a single line of improved code. It merely enriches the legal apparatus. But the visible cost of litigation is only the surface. The deeper damage is the chilling effect it casts over the entire ecosystem. Startups frequently abandon research and development in certain technological sectors entirely. Alternatively, they are forced to settle out of court, structurally unable to afford the millions of dollars required to legally prove that a competitor's junk patent is in fact invalid. This chilling effect silently eradicates future breakthroughs. When the primary barrier to entry in a technological market is not engineering difficulty, but the threat of ruinous legal warfare initiated by patent trolls, the entrepreneurial drive is suffocated. The patent, once a specialized tool to protect a vulnerable pioneer, is now mass-produced and deployed as a tactical weapon of market suppression. The explosion of litigation demonstrates that the economic value of a patent is increasingly derived not from the technological utility of the underlying invention, but from its capacity to inflict unbearable legal costs upon one's competitors. Corporations now aggressively mine old, dormant patents to tax competitors, diverting capital away from research and into legal settlements. we must analyze the phenomenon famously termed Rembrandts in the Attic strategy. Picture the modern corporate headquarters divided into two distinct zones: the laboratory, characterized by abandoned research and development and dormant facilities, and the attic, a space overflowing with dusty, archived legal documents. Instead of focusing on generating new knowledge, corporations dispatch armies of lawyers into these attics to unearth old, broadly worded patents. These historical documents are then weaponized, fired like legal missiles at competing companies who are actively innovating in the market. A prime example is the Rambus Corporation, which infiltrated the JEDEC standard setting body specifically to hijack semiconductor standards using its dormant patent portfolio. This strategy fundamentally perverts the economic rationale of intellectual property. The data highlight surrounding Texas Instruments is particularly revealing. Texas Instruments effectively transformed itself into a licensing powerhouse. At times, the company generated nearly $1 billion annually purely from aggressively enforcing its legacy patent portfolio against other active tech firms. When a corporation discovers that litigation yields a higher return on investment than actual engineering, the economic engine is thrown into reverse. Capital that should be flowing into the laboratories to fund the next generation of technological breakthroughs is instead aggressively diverted into legal departments to fund the settlement extortion. The Rembrandts in the Attic approach relies on the ambiguity and excessive breadth of poorly examined historical patents. By leveraging these abstract claims against modern, complex products, stagnant corporations essentially act as toll collectors on the highway of progress. They tax the active innovators, extracting massive rents without contributing any new, tangible value to the current market. This strategy transforms the intellectual property system into a mechanism for corporate parasitism. The tragedy here is the allocation of human intellect. Brilliant minds are diverted from pushing the boundaries of science to dissecting the boundaries of legal phrasing, ensuring that the ghosts of past inventions haunt the pioneers of the future. Administrative and judicial shifts have completely inverted the incentives, standards, and the economic outcomes of the US patent landscape. This diagnostic matrix lays bare the silent revolution that occurred between 1980 and 2000. Let us compare the pre-1982 system with a post-1990 system across four critical dimensions. First, consider the judicial venue. Historically, regional courts provided a balanced interpretation of patent disputes. Today, we operate under the centralized Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, a venue that maintains a deeply pro-patent posture. Second, analyze PTO funding. In the past, the office was taxpayer funded, functioning as a strict governmental gatekeeper. Currently, it is applicant fee funded, treating patent seekers as clients and operating as a high volume output service. Third, evaluate the standard of review. The historical standard was strictly rigorous regarding obviousness, requiring a high threshold of genuine novelty. The modern standard is dangerously lenient on obviousness, allowing trivial modifications to receive federal protection. Finally, look at the primary patent function. Originally, a patent served as a defensive shield, primarily functioning to protect active research and development. Today, it has mutated into an offensive weapon, a cannon utilized for extracting rents, monetizing abstract claims, and directly targeting competitors. Without a single sweeping legislative vote, piecemeal procedural changes fundamentally rewrote US innovation policy. This matrix proves that systemic inversion does not require grand ideological declarations. It only requires subtle shifts in institutional funding and appellate architecture. The silent revolution transferred immense economic power from the creators of technology to the accumulators of legal rights. The matrix exposes the stark reality. The criteria for obtaining a monopoly have collapsed, while the power to enforce that monopoly has amplified exponentially. The intended equilibrium between public domain and private reward has been entirely dismantled by administrative creep and judicial centralization. By isolating and altering the specific dimensions of venue, funding, and standard of review. The foundational philosophy of intellectual property was subverted from within, creating an ecosystem that rewards legal strategy far more than scientific discovery. The system must incentivize third parties to provide prior art during the application phase to stop junk patents before they are granted. To repair the engine, we must construct the first pillar of reform, establishing pre-grant opposition. Currently, a broad stream of unexamined applications flows into the PTO, creating a bottleneck that examiners simply cannot process effectively. The solution is to restructure the filtration funnel. We must design a mechanism that allows competitors and academics to directly inject prior art, which is existing historical and technical knowledge, into the PTO's review process while the application is still pending. The explanatory window clarifies the necessity of this approach. Government examiners simply cannot know every single industry's deep history or obscure technical literature. By allowing competitors to securely submit definitive evidence before a patent is actually granted, the PTO instantly gains access to a free, highly motivated research arm. This leverages the self-interest of the market to perform the gatekeeping function that the underfunded agency cannot perform alone. Competitors are naturally incentivized to filter out obvious non-novel claims to protect their own operational freedom. Pre-grant opposition transforms the examination process from an isolated, resource-starved bureaucratic task into a crowdsourced adversarial verification of truth. When the burden of finding obscure prior art is decentralized and placed upon the industry actors who possess the most intimate technical knowledge, the structural blindness of the PTO is cured. We utilize the competitive friction of the free market to validate the intellectual property rights. If an idea is truly groundbreaking, it will survive the scrutiny of its harshest critics. If it is a trivial, obvious combination of existing knowledge, the pre-grant opposition filter will trap it, preventing the issuance of a junk patent and saving the economy millions in future litigation costs. This pillar addresses the epistemological deficit of the Patent Office, acknowledging that the collective knowledge of the scientific and the corporate community is vastly superior to the isolated research capacity of a single overburdened examiner staring at a screen. Rather than scrutinizing every application identically, the PTO must allocate intense resources to rigorously challenge and re-examine economically vital patents. This brings us to the second pillar of reform, the post-grant re-examination filter. We must embrace the key concept of the asymmetry of attention. It is fundamentally irrational to apply the same level of scrutiny to a trivial gadget as to a foundational semiconductor architecture. We must focus the PTO's limited resources strictly on the specific patents that dictate massive market control, ensuring they are truly novel. The filtration mechanism operates in two distinct layers. Layer 1 is broad and fast. This provides light scrutiny for the vast majority of patents holding little economic value, preventing administrative paralysis. Layer 2 is a crucible, a specialized, highly rigorous secondary review process reserved for critical technologies. Observe the process flow. Step 1 occurs when a competitor is threatened by a newly issued patent. Under the current broken system, they face ruinous court costs. Step 2 introduces the alternative. Instead of spending $4 million in federal court, the threatened competitor pays a substantial, but comparatively lower, fee to trigger a formal PTO re-examination. Step 3 initiates expert validity review. Here, elite, expert examiners dedicate the proper time, resources, and intellectual rigor to definitively evaluate the patent's validity. This crucible essentially acts as an economic safety valve. It allows the market to signal which patents actually matter. If a patent is never challenged, the initial light scrutiny was sufficient. But if a monopoly threatens an entire industry, the competitors fund intensive re-examination, forcing the patent to survive a true intellectual stress test. By stratifying the examination process, we concentrate the highest level of scientific and legal verification on the patents that pose the greatest potential threat to ongoing innovation, efficiently eliminating the extortionate power of unexamined broad claims. This two-tiered approach acknowledges the economic reality that most patents are worthless, but the few that are weaponized require an uncompromising, expert dissection to protect the integrity of the market. Unexamined patents should not enjoy a legally insurmountable presumption of validity. Technical experts, not juries, should decide what is obvious. The third pillar demands judicial recalibration. We must contrast the current state of patent litigation with our proposed rationalized state. In the current state, a patent enters the courtroom shielded by an immense structural presumption of validity. Breaking this shield requires clear and convincing evidence, an incredibly high legal threshold to meet, especially when the decision makers are laypeople. The current system relies on bewildered juries to decipher labyrinthine technical specifications and judge what is considered obvious to a hypothetical engineering expert. This is fundamentally flawed. The explanatory window reveals the core philosophical correction. If a patent was quickly rubber stamped by an overworked, under resourced examiner, the courts must not treat it as an infallible government decree. In the proposed state, this absolute shield of validity is removed for any patents that have bypassed the rigorous PTO re-examination crucible we just discussed. Consequently, the legal standard required to invalidate the patent is lowered to a simple preponderance of the evidence. Validity must be actively proven, not blindly assumed. Furthermore, the determination of novelty and obviousness must be transferred from lay juries to specialized technical experts. A panel of everyday citizens cannot accurately assess the prior art of algorithmic financial models or genomic sequencing. Judicial recalibration strips away the artificial legal armor that protects junk patents in the courtroom. By lowering the evidentiary threshold for invalidation and relying on genuine scientific expertise, we dismantle the asymmetric advantage that patent trolls currently exploit. The courtroom must cease to be a theater of emotional persuasion regarding abstract claims and return to being a forum for rigorous, peer-reviewed technological verification. When we demand that a government-granted monopoly actually prove its worth without hiding behind the unearned presumption of infallibility, we restore intellectual honesty to the judicial process and remove the extortionate leverage of the patent weapon. Aligning the incentives of the PTO, the courts, and inventors restores the patent system as a catalyst for genuine progress, not a barrier. We arrive at our synthesis. Re-engineering the innovation engine, we must visualize the recalibrated ecosystem, a harmonious integration of four distinct domains. First, the gates, where pre-grant opposition acts as a primary filter, utilizing the collective intelligence of the market to block junk applications early in the process. Second, the crucible, the post-grant re-examination phase, where economically important patents are subjected to intense, rigorous validation by elite experts. Third, the courts, where judicial recalibration ensures that only truly novel, technologically sound patents can survive the scrutiny of litigation, stripping away unearned presumptions of validity. Finally, the market. As these reforms take hold, massive amounts of capital are naturally redirected from wasteful legal defense strategies back into productive research and development. This ecosystem aligns the incentives of every actor. The inventor is incentivized to only file genuine breakthroughs. The PTO is incentivized to utilize external knowledge and stratify its focus. And the courts are incentivized to rely on technical truth rather than procedural shields. Consider the concluding callout. By intentionally increasing the friction required to acquire and defend a patent, we systematically eliminate the friction to innovate. A healthy, functioning patent system creates a precise equilibrium. It fiercely protects the true pioneer, granting them the monopoly necessary to recoup their sunk costs, without allowing them to permanently tax the future. We must transition from an era where legal manipulation dictates market success back to an era where scientific discovery drives human progress. The survival of our technological dominance depends upon this repair. As we rapidly accelerate into the AI era, where algorithms generate code and discover compounds at unprecedented speeds, the definition of novelty will face unimaginable stress. If we do not implement these structural reforms now, the AI era will simply exponentially multiply the gridlock, generating millions of overlapping machine-made claims that will crush the patent system entirely. We must rebuild this engine before the future outpaces our archaic legal architecture. Thank you. See you next time.